In this video, I want to talk a little about British independence. It's Brexit on the 31st of January 2020, and here in Scotland, as in elsewhere throughout the United Kingdom, of course, it's been a very big issue. Several things I need to talk about here. I want to talk about why the SNP weaponised Brexit. I want to talk about our vision as an organisation, a force for good, for British independence. And I talk about that in the hope and expectation that others will hear it and help to apply it, for example, the politicians and so on. And also I want to talk about the benefits of a Great British Brexit. So to start with, prior to the 2016 election, our organisation, A Force for Good, which is a pro-UK unionist organisation, we didn't really get involved in the Leave or Remain issue because we knew that people who are for the British Union had different opinions on that, one way or the other. So we just stayed out of it, really. We didn't really touch on it, but as soon as the vote was in, the SNP clearly began to weaponise the vote, to use it as part of their wider aim to destroy the United Kingdom. And so we realised as unionists, as a campaigning unionist advocacy and activism group, we realised we had to get involved. It wasn't realistic, it's not politically possible to sit on the fence when your main opponents are weaponising a particular issue. You have to take a side on that, and it really has to be the other side from what they're taking. So they weaponised Brexit because they look upon it simply as a way of making trouble for Westminster. What was the old Irish Republican phrase? England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity. Well, the way that the SNP look upon Brexit is Westminster's difficulty is the SNP's opportunity. So the SNP immediately took the opposite side, and the opposite side, I might add, of over 1 million people in Scotland who voted for Leave. And they took that side because they thought they could manipulate it. And at the end of the day, we have to understand that the SNP is a one-party, one-trick pony. They simply want to break up the United Kingdom, and they'll take any side. The SNP used to be for leaving. They were for leaving when Westminster was for remaining. Now that Westminster is for leaving, they're for remaining. So they're not a party really of principle, they're simply a party that aims to get its will done by whatever means necessary. And Brexit is one of the tools that they'll use in their armoury to do that. So when we realised they were doing that, obviously we took sides, and we are very strongly for Leave, and we're for British independence, and we've come out clearly. We're primarily a unionist organisation. We primarily promote the British Union, but we also talk about British independence in the long term and the importance of that for the integrity of the Union. Now, we have a vision for Brexit. It's a 4-point vision. The first is that all 4 corners of the United Kingdom must come together and make this work. If we do, number 2, Britain will be free in new ways to invest, to reindustrialise and to create jobs. And of course that's the big political issue, because how you go about reinvesting and reindustrialising and creating jobs is something that we can all argue about, and different parties have different ways of going about that. But Britain will at least be free to do it in a way that they were not within the European Union. Thirdly, obviously we want to see Britain remaining committed to the peace of the European continent, especially through membership of NATO. And continuing to trade, obviously, with the European continent. And fourthly, we want Britain to re-establish strong political, diplomatic, economic trading links with the rest of the Commonwealth, the former British Commonwealth, the wealth that we have in common with all these countries that Britain is historically related with. And there is vast potential in these new trade deals that we can make, because at the end of the day, it's better to be trading freely with the 194 countries worldwide than being largely focused on 27 in the European continent. And let's remember that the British economy is one of the largest in the world. And so when people, the naysayers, the SNP people, let's remember that they don't want to accept any of that. They just want to provide doom and gloom forevermore. And we shouldn't get taken in with that, because that's not the reality. When you step outside, that's not the reality. Britain is, relatively speaking, a major world economy. There's no reason for it to fail in any way, except through catastrophic political leadership, which we don't have, thankfully. So it can and it will prosper when we trade, when we base a programme of trade with 194 other countries worldwide, not just 27 on the European continent. Huge rewards waiting for us if that is done properly, which is of course the $6 million question. We accept that. However, if it is done successfully, then prosperity can bind the British Union. If we get good trade deals for all of Britain, it means we also get good trade deals for firms in Scotland, and that will benefit everybody up here. And the people of Scotland are less likely to throw away that economic prosperity if it can be created through Brexit, which it most certainly can. It also, I'll get to in a minute, it puts the SNP into a difficult economic and political bind. But going back to the SNP deciding to weaponise Brexit, just think about how unrepresentative that makes their party. You know, over 1 million people in Scotland, out of the numbers who voted of somewhere around 3 million. Over 1 million people are not represented by a single Scottish National Party Member of Parliament or by a single Scottish National Party Member of Holyrood. All of these people are for Remain. Not a single one of them represents any of the 1 million people in Scotland who voted to leave. That's very unrepresentative. The Tory party in Scotland represents more people on this matter than the SNP. Because also, let's remember that 1/3 of SNP supporters also voted to leave. So the SNP doesn't even represent their members and their supporters and their voters who voted to leave. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute democratic disgrace. Virtually all, well, a majority of the MPs in Westminster are more representative for the people of Scotland. An English MP who supports Leave can speak better for 1 million people in Scotland, even though his constituency is in England. A Welsh MP who supports Leave can speak up for over 1 million people in Scotland who voted to leave, when not a single SNP Member of Parliament will do so, which is also a benefit of Westminster, because while we don't necessarily vote for people, while we don't necessarily vote for the MPs from Northern Ireland, Wales or England, they nevertheless can speak up for people in Scotland on issues for which the SNP won't speak up on. So Britain is leaving the EU finally on Friday the 31st of January at 11 p.m. And And Big Ben was going to bong 11 times. Big Ben's not going to bong. So what I'm going to do is to give you 11 good reasons or good consequences of leaving the EU. And the first one is obviously we can take back the billions of pounds which we would otherwise be giving to the EU. About 17 billion or thereabouts. And we can use it instead to spend here at home on the priorities which our elected politicians choose to spend it on, not what the Brussels bureaucrats choose to spend it on. Another benefit, vast potential in the new trade deals which I was talking about. We're the largest in the world. We will prosper outside the EU when we trade with 194 countries in the world, not just concentrating on 27 on the European continent. More job opportunities and higher wages are most certainly possible. As we know, the essentially open door immigration that we've had from the EU so far has lowered wages, certainly at the lower skilled level. And even at the higher skilled level, crying out loud, it's put many people, many British citizens out of jobs. There's no danger, number 4, there's no danger of having to bail out the sinking euro. We don't have to bail out the failed economies that may be coming up in the Eurozone. Again, that's saving potential billions. Number 5, we don't have to abide by the so-called Stability and Growth Pact. Now, this is a very crucial element of the European Union, and it's one of the reasons why the Scottish National Party's goose is not just cooked but fried to a crisp. And that's because to be a member of the European Union, you have to keep your budget deficit within 3% of your gross domestic product. Now, what that means, a budget deficit is the measure of the annual amount that a government has to borrow to meet the shortfall between what it brought in taxes and what it expends on public services. Now, every country in the world runs a deficit because every country takes less in taxes than they need to spend on their citizenry. So every country has a budget deficit, and the European Union needs it to be kept within 3% of your gross domestic product. And if you can't keep it within that, then what you have to do is you have to spend less, and or you have to tax a lot more. Now, Britain obviously has kept within that. That has, to an extent, has actually prevented certain government spending, which we no longer have to be constrained by. So that's good news for the Keynesians, who like lots of public spending. However, the critical matter here is Scotland's position. Now, Scotland's budget deficit is presently 7% of Scotland's gross domestic product. Now, to get that down to 3%, you will require levels of austerity, levels of cutbacks in government expenditure that will make the present situation look like a walk in the park. And it will also have to mean taxing the very few people left in Scotland willing to basically put up with such high taxes. So in other words, it's a non-starter. It's a non-starter. You're not going to get the Scottish economy to a level reasonably, humanely, that it will actually be able to join the EU in the first place. So the SNP know this, and they know that they've got no chance of meeting that Growth and Stability Pact, which means they've got no chance of rejoining the EU. It would be a horrendous attempt if they were to do so. It would be ridiculous, and it would be unnecessary as well. And so that's something that, from the British government point of view, we don't have to abide by that anymore. And from the point of view of us unionists, it's a good thing, because it means that that it automatically disqualifies Scotland from membership. Scotland's true position is to be within the British family, to be within the United Kingdom, where resources can be redistributed from certain areas at certain times. And very often that will mean richer parts of the rest of the United Kingdom helping out Scotland, and sometimes it will mean rich parts in Scotland helping out poorer areas in the rest of our islands. But that's what it's about. That's what the Union is about. It's about sharing and redistributing our resources. Number 6, we can prioritise and invest and grow British industry. Because within the EU we're constrained in various ways by a number of policies. And if the government was so minded, now that we're out of the EU, we could do things like we could favour the setup of domestic firms via specific investment. We could subsidise existing ones with state aid. We could levy taxes to invest in particular industries. We could discriminate in favour of local producers. We could prevent firms closing down and moving production outside the UK. We could take firms into public ownership if necessary. Policies which weren't necessarily, which are interventionist policies certainly, which may appeal to some on the left, but which were certainly not possible within the EU. So leaving the EU opens up new opportunities for investment and industrial growth and employment, which were not there under the EU treaty. Number 7, we can offer contracts to British companies only if we so choose. That's something that we are essentially prohibited from doing within the EU. Within the EU we have to open up contracts to tender worldwide. Number 8 goes without saying, properly done we can save Britain's fishing communities and we can help to rebuild them, including also the farming communities, because a certain level of subsidy is necessary for British farming, but done correctly we can move towards a programme of self-sufficiency even in food. So that's 8 and 9. Number 10, cheaper food maybe. It's argued that food prices are kept artificially high as a result of import tariffs into the EU, so perhaps we'll get cheaper food. And number 11, we can abolish or we can lower VAT, because VAT is an EU tax. We did not have it prior to joining the EU. So outside the EU we can actually get rid of VAT if the government was so minded, and it's certainly something that I would encourage them so to do. So there you go, there's 11 good reasons to leave the European Union. There's 11 opportunities that are opening up for us. So thanks for watching this video, folks. We're going to be, if you're watching it before the 31st of January, we're going to be in George Square on that evening, 10:30 for 11 PM. Come along, bring your friends, bring your banners, bring your flags, bring your posters, and let's celebrate the dawn of British independence. Thanks for watching.